Hi, I'm Dan Barker. I'm co-president of the Freedom From Religion Foundation, and welcome to Free Thought Matters. Free Thought Matters is a weekly show produced by the Freedom From Religion Foundation, which is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. We have more than 30,000 atheists and agnostics who are working to uphold the constitutional principle of the separation between religion and government. We ask you to join us today in our critical work to support reason and our secular constitution. You can join us at ffrf.org. Did you know there was once a governor who was an outspoken atheist? Culbert Olson was the governor of California from 1939 to 1943. At his inauguration, Culbert Olson refused to place his hand on a Bible when taking his oath of office. My co-host, Annie Laurie Gaylor, recently interviewed Governor Olson's granddaughter, Debra Deanne Olson, about her famous grandfather, as well as Dr. Craig Wilkinson. They are co-authors of a new book about Culbert Levy Olson, the atheist progressive who became a governor 80 years ago.
So Deborah, you and I have something in common. We're both third-generation freethinkers. At least you are on your father's side of the family, your grandfather's side of the family. And I wondered what it was like growing up with a grandfather who had been a governor and who was a very stalwart atheist.
It was fabulous. You know, when I was very young, it just felt like a big loving family, and my father adored his father. But I remember we used to go over on the weekends to Grandpa's house. He lived on Mariposa for 29 years, actually, and he had a fabulous home. And his sister would be there smoking a Tiparillo with feathers, playing poker. And my mom would be playing Clair de Lune on the piano. And my little sister and I were there, and my cousin Richard, who's in our book. And we just had fun. And I remember sitting on my grandfather's lap, and he would chew tobacco because he loved cigars, and he would spit it into this gold platoon. And I just remember that comes into my memory. And when I did a presentation, I forgot to mention something really important, which was I remember a debate that he and my father got into, because my father said, "Dad, you cannot change the billions of people in this world that are religious." And he said, "John, the reality is organized religion could become the downfall of humanity."
So your grandfather was a very stalwart atheist, and we'll talk more about that and how it entered his career. Your father was an agnostic, but I understand that when you were growing up, that part of his background wasn't really real prominent. You didn't know a whole lot about it.
No, I didn't. I always had respect for him, and it was kind of a trip to be the grandfather's granddaughter. But I'd go to political events because I got very political on the Democratic side. And I did fundraising for John Kerry and Dennis Kucinich and Hillary Clinton. So I was doing all these events, and people would come up to me that were in politics and say, "Your grandfather was so ahead of his time on so many levels, and we loved him so much." So I felt proud, but I didn't know the depth and breadth. And then when I started researching him, because Christine Klein, the head state librarian up in Sacramento, called me one day and said, "We know so little about your grandfather out of all the governors, and we're about to do a website for the governors. Do you have any information on him?" I said, "Oh my God, I have a whole garage full of photographs and personal letters, originals and everything." So she was flipped out. So I FedExed everything up there, and they scanned it, and then he was no longer invisible in history. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was an atheist, because the Republicans do horrible things to put down Democrats anyway, but the fact that he was an atheist, I think if they could have erased him from history, they would have.
So you found kind of a treasure trove of his progressive background, including his free thinking.
Yes.
So I want to ask Dr. Wilkinson, how did you first become interested in Governor Olson and become aware of his free-thinking views?
Well, I actually had a book called Atheist Quotes. I should know the name of the author, but I don't right now. But I was just reading through the quotes, and I came on a quote, and the quote was this: and the person that was writing the quote I hadn't seen yet because it was on the bottom, but the quote was that he had been to General Eisenhower's return speech, or at least viewed it. I don't remember if he was there, but he knew about it and he must have read it. And he said that General Eisenhower, after World War II, he came back to Abilene, gave his return speech. And in his return speech, he was speaking about D-Day. And he said it was going to be cloudy on D-Day. And so he prayed that night before D-Day. And when he woke up, it was clear. And they were able to go ahead and invade Normandy, France. And the quote at the bottom said, "How ridiculous is this?" Did he have any idea that he was sending 10,000 young men to their deaths? What kind of a statement is this? It was something like that. That was kind of close. And so I thought, wow, that just is ridiculous to think that that would prove to you that God exists when the whole World War II was a horrible, horrible mess. And so I looked down at the bottom and it said, Culbert Olson. I thought, boy, I've never heard of that guy. And what a weird name. I thought, that is weird. Mm-hmm. So then they had a little thing about him and said he had been a Mormon. I thought, oh yes, I know the Mormon names, they're all weird. The religion has a bunch of weird names in it. So that piqued my interest because, of course, I was an ex-Mormon. And then as I started reading about him and learning about him, I just got this bond with this guy because it felt like my life. I knew what it was like to be a Mormon. I knew all that. So as you read about how he got away from Mormonism, what he was doing, it just mirrored me. And I just bonded with him. I said, geez, he sounds like my brother or somebody we should get together and talk, because that's the kind of bond that happened.
So when did you become interested in writing a book? You two ended up collaborating on a book, and I think Deborah wrote more about the personal. You wrote more about the atheist side of Governor Olson. How did you meet each other?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. We met just because you can Google a lot of things, and I was Googling, trying to find any information I could, and it was hard to find information. And I saw in there that somebody had given a talk about him. And so you could Google up the time and you could download it. So I downloaded it, and it was an amazing talk. She gave a really interesting talk. And I thought, this person knows so much, I've just got to contact her. So I called her up and I said, I thought maybe she wouldn't answer or wouldn't, because it seemed like maybe I was just a peon, and she was probably a bitty, having your grandfather be a governor, they were probably a big political family, and she would just kind of not want to talk to me. But she was very nice. She was very nice. And we got to talking, and I said, gee, I'd like to tell his story. And she said, oh gosh, I'm interested too. And that's really how it started, don't you think?
Yeah, it was 2 years. I said, sure. I had no idea the complexity of it.
So it was 2 years of research and writing.
Research and writing, and calling the Hyde Museum in New York where FDR's records are, because I heard, again, these are stories you hear about your family, that FDR and my grandfather were really close. FDR had the New Deal for the United States. My grandfather created the New Deal for California. They were simpaticos. So when I called the Hyde Museum, again, they were very open, and they said, oh, you have no idea all the stuff we have. And they FedExed me 180 documents of correspondence. In those days, we didn't have email, anything, so there were personal letters, and there were a lot of telegrams back and forth. FDR would say congratulations to my grandfather. He had him come to the Chicago Democratic Convention, and my dad was with him. There's a picture of that in our book, which I found pictures that I didn't even know existed. And FDR was going to have him be his vice presidential running mate. But there's one document I read which said, well, we can't do that, Culbert. And I think it's because he was an open atheist, personally.
So when he ran for governor, he was an open atheist at that time. And there's a very famous picture of him that we are going to show on the screen, taking the oath of office. Do you want to explain why his hand is in his pocket?
Oh, that's the best of all. Imagine. And what we found out is that he's the only high official in the United States government that ever has had the courage to do this. You wonder how many really do not believe in these fantasies.
So why did he have his hand in his pocket when he was taking the oath?
So the judge was standing there and said, "Put your hand on the Bible." And he said, "I am not going to do such a thing because there is no God." And he made some really insulting comments about the Bible, which upsets people. But so he put his hand in his pocket and he said, "I will affirm." And what's that thing in the book about there is no deity, we have to help ourselves? What's that quote? He has so many great quotes.
Well, he said, God won't help us, we have to help ourselves.
So both of you gave a presentation about your book at the Freedom from Religion Foundation's 41st Annual Convention, and you both got awards with that picture engraved on it for posterity, and it was called The Courage to Tell the Truth, kind of a posthumous award for the only openly atheist governor in the history of our country.
Or any political, like Barney Franks, who I love, some Congress people are open atheists, but not at a governor level. And I'm so proud of it. And originally I was just going to write the book so that my grandchildren, little Somerset and Emerson, and who I hope I have more with my daughters, are great girls, but I wanted them to have a legacy and the pride of their grandfather. But now that I'm into it, and I love working for a positive future, which is very complicated and difficult and challenging right now. But now you've got my attention, and I'm going to help.
So, well, carrying on the legacy of your grandfather. And before we go to a break, Dr. Wilkinson, can you give us some idea of the scope of his views on religion and some of his, he did speeches, he did activism after he was governor?
Well, yeah, after his retirement, he just decided that he would support secular humanism and agnosticism, atheism, if you will, simply because he just felt strongly about it. I think basically he was a philosopher-type person. He was kind of a statesman, and he liked to be involved with ideas. In fact, his son Richard said he would go over to the house, his grandson, pardon me, would go over to the house and he would start to engage him, and he said he would talk all the time about news of the world, political ideas, views on religion.
But didn't he actually had some humanist groups or free-thinking groups, or he did some articles, did he do radio?
Well, yes, he did. He was on television. He was the first president of the United Secularists of America. And in that, he got his voice out through a little magazine called Progressive World that we've all forgotten about. It's in the dustbin of history. I think it lasted about 10 years. If anybody's interested, all the volumes are back in the Center for Inquiry. They have a stack of them. I actually went back there and looked at them. Mm-hmm. But he would write frequently in there, and there he would give his views on religion, and he was constantly opposing religion.
So we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to show some excerpts of your talk at our convention, and also some of the writings of this amazing governor who was an atheist. And we'll be right back with Free Thought Matters.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
I'm Charlotte, and I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist. I've always been intrigued by religion, and when I was younger, I desperately wanted to be religious, to be more accepted by my family, who was in majority Catholic. My parents didn't raise me religious. I was never baptized. I never took communion. Well, once I took communion. It was a pretty bad idea. I don't think it was worth a church full of angry elderly who glared at me as I waved the communion wafer back and forth, asking my grandma what should be done with it. Also, the wine was pretty gross. From this experience and countless others, I came to 3 conclusions that sort of dictate how I live my secular life. One is that I find people of faith to be more exclusionary and less accepting. 2 is that I would rather work to please the people around me who I care about than someone who, to my knowledge, doesn't exist. And 3, that I would rather help people than pray for them.
Welcome back to Free Thought Matters. I am talking with the co-authors of a new book about the governor of California who was an atheist. Your grandfather, Deborah, and a man that you have studied, Dr. Wilkinson. And Deborah, first I want to talk a little bit more about his general progressive background. And you do a very good summary of that in the speech you gave before the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So we're going to take a quick look at that.
In 1938, Culbert Olson entered the race for governor of California. He's featured on the front cover, this is a very famous painting, of Life magazine. The article reports, Culbert Levy Olson advances the progressive agenda in California and is known as the people's candidate. Mr. Olson is well-dressed, urbane, an elderly idol of Western politics, and he looks like a movie star's projection of a governor. He's been called the godfather of progressive politics because so many of the policies that came right out of his being are being implemented today. Olson had a very strong opinion on income inequality, which he felt was the underlying cause of the Great Depression. Election day, November 8, 1938. Democrat Culbert Olson defeated Republican Frank Merriam with 54% of the vote. Governor Olson was the first Democratic governor in California for over 40 years. Now, this takes courage. Governor Olson was sworn in with his hand in his pocket, and he said, I affirm, instead of so help me God. Needless to say, for 3 or 4 days, everybody went insane in Sacramento, you know? Because the oil companies like Standard Oil and the Catholic Church, he was like their enemy, you know? When he asked why he did this, he replied, because God can't help me, and anyway, there is no such person. It's important to note that no other high government official in America before or since has had the courage to do the same thing during their inaugurations. During his inaugural speech, he shows us his sense of fair play and defense for the average American citizen. He states, there must be measures calculated to eliminate every form of special privilege or class control in our economic system. Olson's grand vision for California became known as Olson's New Deal for California. President Roosevelt and Governor Olson shared the same political ideals.
And Dr. Wilkinson, you've done an awful lot of research about Governor Olson's views on religion, and he did a lot of writing, a lot of speaking about it. And so I thought, let's show some of those, some of your presentation of his views and quotes about religion.
Now, the next thing that happens, I think, of importance in terms of what was happening in his religion is Robert Ingersoll. And I think a lot of you in this room have heard of Robert Ingersoll. If you haven't, he was an orator who traveled the nation. He gave over 1,000 speeches in the late 1800s on topics like the myth of Moses, the devil, an agnostic's view of Christmas. Anyway, he was forbidden in religious homes. He was considered an evil man. And I think it took some courage for Culbert, especially with his Uncle William, who stayed active in the church. Just tell his uncle, hey, I'm going to see this guy speak, and he did. Now, here's his impression of what happened after that speech. He said, when that Sunday evening I listened to the bold, fearless public declaration of this great agnostic's honest convictions, so clearly based upon reason and so clearly supported by historical and scientific facts, the last cloud of doubt was removed from my mind. I became a confirmed free thinker.
So Dr. Wilkinson, you feel simpatico toward the views of Governor Olson because you were both raised Mormon and have rejected it. And I understand that you've left the Mormon Church?
Well, yes, I separated ideologically as a 20-year-old. I was just a believer in science, just like science as a teenager. And then later in life, they took a hard stance on the gays and lesbians, and that was the end for me. I have a nephew who's gay, and he's really a nice person. And so I just sent in my letter of resignation and said I'm through. And it takes a lot to do that, but you can. And then they take you off the rolls, and you're officially no longer a Mormon.
And, well, good for you. And now you're plugged into the humanist community, correct?
Yes,
You're in Utah, I should add.
Yes, we have a small group in Utah. We don't have a large group, but there's about 75 secular humanists. I just discovered them and joined, and eventually worked my up to be on the board of the Utah Secularists, yeah.
Well, good for you. And Deborah, I think you're saying that your grandfather, it was a big deal when he split from the Mormon religion because he was considered, or they were considered, to be part of the Mormon royalty in that area of the country.
Yes, his mother, Delilah King Olson, my great-grandmother, was an amazing woman, and she remained a Mormon, but she also became the first woman political leader in Utah, in Millard County. And but she was just so sweet. You should see in the book, he wrote a poem to his mother, and he took care of her all her later years that is so gorgeous. I mean, there was just a lot of love there. So
even though he left the Mormon religion, he wasn't shunned by his family?
He was by the community, I'm sure, and by certain relatives, but not his family. And so when he moved to California, he was appalled by what he saw with the Great Depression, and he got very involved. And he was going to run for governor, but then he heard Upton Sinclair speak, 1934, who was such a progressive, and he stood behind him and he helped him with his campaign. He was the chair of the Democratic Party, I hope you can...
Well, that's pretty big.
Yeah, and so he worked with him, but then in 1938 he ran, and he won.
And I hadn't realized that Upton Sinclair I'd forgotten that he'd made a run for the governorship,
Yeah.
But your grandfather had promoted Upton Sinclair, so he was rubbing shoulders with all the progressives.
Yes, and the Liberty Foundation today in Los Angeles is huge, and their leader is Upton Sinclair. I mean, it's still a movement that, it's about the people, and Grandpa was so interested in the separation of church and state. I remember when you started saying because of the gay issue, my sister, Culbert Olson's other granddaughter, and her partner were the first lesbians to get married in Los Angeles
Really?
on the steps of the Beverly Hills Courthouse. And he talked a lot about the Catholic Church and the separation of church and state. And I think 80 years later, but if he'd been alive, he would have come to their wedding. It was such a celebration. There was press from all over the world. They had a Jewish rabbi marry them, but they're both pretty much secularists too. And it was a big deal. It opened up with Gloria Allred. It opened up gay marriage. It was exciting.
So you are carrying on the legacy of progressivism from your grandfather's background, correct?
I think it's the wave of the future. And as I said, I'm so impressed now, the more I study secular humanism and the atheist movement, and I love to help create things. I'm kind of a trailblazer. It's just in my DNA, and I'm a troublemaker. And I absolutely believe now that we can have a lot of fun and we can get the young people involved in this movement and to be openly atheist or secular. It's very exciting what can happen now. I think it's going to, and I want to help brand it in a way that it attracts people and politicians so that people can be honest about who they are.
And of course, young people are in growing numbers rejecting religion. We're seeing up to 36% of Generation Z, who are the new young'uns. But you're right, they're not necessarily participating actively in the secular movement. And at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we give out a lot of scholarships and awards, and we have great faith in the next generation. But we'd love to work with you on attracting younger people to the movement.
The time is perfect. 3 times more young people have voted already for these elections that are coming up. And they realize they have to be involved for us to change things.
So you have called your governor the people's governor. Just a few concluding remarks about his overall legacy.
Well, he was called the godfather of progressive politics because, remember, this was 80 years ago, and he had so much courage. And everything from healthcare to having the utilities be a public event to being very, very interested in the little guy, You know, obviously, healthcare is a big issue right now. One of the most fantastic things is that he actually started the Latino-Mexican political bloc in California. He invited Latinos to his inauguration, which was unheard of. He appointed the first African-American woman and Latino judge in California. He talked about race relations at the Golden Gate Bridge expo that was unbelievable. He said, being a racist is worse than a murderer or a tax evader. Think about that, 80 years ago, having the courage to do that.
Well, think about if we had more atheist governors and public officials promoting this world instead of religion, we would
well, you know,
be in
it's
so
all,
much
it's
better
all
shape.
about money and power, and they're holding on, and they're growing, but they shouldn't be. I mean, when I heard Congressman Huffman speak, I was so inspired about the future.
Congressman Huffman, who started the Free Thought Caucus in Congress, which I never thought I would live to see.
No, it's exciting.
So it is
it's just the beginning. But people are smart today, and they want to change.
And it is very important to document this almost lost history. I was aware of Governor Olson's atheism. We have something up on our website for Free Thought of the Day, but I really didn't know very much about him. And so you've really revived that.
If you knew how many people came up to me after I gave this talk here and said, I can't even believe it, we didn't even know this. I heard Bill Maher do a show 2-3 years ago where he said, there's no open atheists in American government. I said, no, there is, you just don't know about it yet,
yes.
You know?
Well, thanks so much, both of you, for documenting this history and bringing back to life the remarkable Governor Olson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Free Thought Matters, because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.